Okay, we're back, you sinners. Welcome to an episode of the Agile Uprising podcast. I have my two favorite sinners. Two of my favorite. There's other sinners out there that are on my favorite list. Let's be honest. But I have fellow sinners, Jay Hrcsko.
Hola,
What's up, Jay?
hola, hola.
And the great Andrew Leff. How are you, sir?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm,
Yes,
I'm still
yes.
working on my coffee.
Yeah, I love your coffee mug that looks like a small coffee pot. That it's
I
just
drink
like
a
this.
pot of coffee, so I thought it would be appropriate to drink from the pot of coffee. So
I mean, what did you when you poured in a mug, you're just creating more work for yourself, right? Just drink
that's
it out.
right. Exactly. Same with
It's
alcohol. Just put the straw in the bottle. Why waste the glass?
yeah,
Did you see that Brewmate makes a Gazinta that you can pour an entire bottle of wine into with the built-in?
Yep.
Like I bought one for my wife, and then I got it, and I looked at it, I went, "This is probably a terribly bad idea."
the so Leff and I used to work for Solutions IQ, and we always had swag at conferences that we would give out every year. Well, one year they gave out a water bottle that was so large. We called it the wine bottle
Yeah.
because you could fit an entire bottle of wine into this because it was that big. I mean, I still have it. It is gigantic. um and it's it's that concept that we're going to be talking about today, gang, because we're going to be referencing gluttony.
What a
So
segue. Nailed
yeah,
Yeah, that is a perfect segue, completely unplanned, but I love it.
I like to think that I accidentally say intelligent things from time to time as opposed to on purpose. But that's better than never saying anything intelligent. Okay, Leff did a good job last time of centering me on gluttony as we go through the 7 deadly sins of agile transformation. And so we're going to be talking about how have we been gluttonous, right? So the idea of gluttony for the literal sense is overindulgence or overconsumption of food or drink, right? Now we'll be a little flexible with that when we say food or drink because there are many other things that we have been consuming. But the other interesting thing in this definition that I was looking at is that it's not just when you actually consume or overindulge, it's also an excessive desire that leads to a lack of control over one's relation with food or harms of the body, right? So that could be alcohol, it could be it could even be healthy activities, right? Like I learned through going through many a program over my days that like anything can turn into a bad thing, right? Exercise, you can over consume on exercise, your body could wear down, break out, you could my wife is into this book series so much, like as soon as we kind of turn all the screens off for the evening, like I've lost her for probably 2.5 hours because she is just in this book. I'm not saying she's over consuming, but there is this idea of like how much reading do you need to do? Like I don't even want to know how much time a day Jay spends reading. um
Fair
so
amount, fair amount.
so yeah, so when you all think so grounding on not just overconsumption but also thinking about consumption, desiring over consumption. Like, what does that, I guess, what does that mean to y'all in terms of our work? Is there something that jumps out at you all?
So, so before we jump into the overconsumption, I want to throw in another potential
Okay.
definition of gluttony that we can think about, right? So, and for those listeners, truth be told, the three of us had a lot of dialogue back and forth before this episode trying to define the differentiation between gluttony and greed, right? Because they're very close kissing cousins. Um, if I know my Bible, everybody start laughing. Deuteronomy 21:20, right? And also in Proverbs, the other side of gluttony is squandering, right? Squandering or profligacy, which is waste. So with the desire to consistently have more food, more drink, more food, more drink, you're also not only over consuming, but you're also creating waste because you're wasting stuff that you're not getting. It's like, I'm already full, but I'm going to keep eating, right? So one of the other things we probably could think about when we talk about the overconsumption is the other side of that, which is we're squandering things or we're creating waste.
And intentionally starving yourself of things, right? Like, and I'm not
Right.
talking about a diet. Like, we've all tried a diet, and some of us are successful at moderating our consumption of things. But if you're intentionally, again,
Mhm.
excess, extremes of anything can be a bad thing, right? That's where anorexia comes from, is that I have body dysmorphia so much that I will intentionally starve myself, right? That can also be bad, right? I don't,
Mhm.
it's kind of gluttony adjacent. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I
So
I think
yeah, go ahead.
I think too what when what comes up for me when we talk about gluttony, and sorry, I still have my morning voice. It's so deep. Um, I think for me, it's anytime we focus our energy too deeply on things we desire and yet can't learn from how we're getting there or how we're progressing or not because we're so locked in. And Chris, your story about your wife reading, she's locked in. The world, you don't see the world right
Mhm.
around you. You don't see the signs. You're just so focused on that one task, that one activity, that one thing. That can become a gluttonous experience, right? So you're sinking all your energy into that one thing, whether, in the definition, whether it be drinking or things of
Yeah.
pleasure. So that lack of balance then comes into play where, you're not seeing the signals around you that are telling you that this is too much, right? You're
Yeah.
not acknowledging it.
It's
The
it's
clinical term is addiction, right? At that point in time, like that is
right.
that's
Right.
where addiction comes from.
And it creates this single-mindedness, almost like I love the mental picture of horse blinders, right? Because to your point, left, if I'm only worried about I need agile teams and there can only be no more than 5 people plus or minus 2 or 7 people plus or minus 2, right? And that's the thing I get centered on. As I'm looking, what you're paying attention to means you're not paying attention to something else. And the more I gluttonously say I need teams to be this size and this way, my blinders are starting to narrow to the point where that's all I see.
We
And there's
meet
a
for we meet for only 15 minutes or less.
right. It needs to be 15 minutes. And it needs to be and there's the concept of the hard boundary, right? We over consume that doing everything by the book. It literally becomes you losing the forest for the trees, right? Like, and I was listening to a conversation. It was about the meta crisis or whatever. A whole bunch of people way smarter than me, and I think it was John Vervaeke who actually says the more when I'm paying attention, when I'm paying attention to you, that means I'm not paying attention to something else. So the world is going on around me. So the more we gluttonously, to your point, narrowly focus on 1 or 2 or 5 things, we're losing the world that's happening around us, and we lose the ability to actually truly adapt and observe what's happening and say, well, shit, this isn't good. Maybe by doing this, I'm creating that, and I got to go fix that now.
So is a good way to ground on gluttony thinking about the areas that we have over focused on? Is that because what I'm hearing from you both is this idea of um when we don't pay attention to the world around us, right? When we become so focused on something, um where do you think that comes from? Is it because we don't know another way? We went to a training class and they say this is what a daily planning meeting is and isn't, and so therefore that's all you think that it is. The idea that, well, anything higher than a 13 we must break down into smaller components because that's just too large. Like, we hear someone say that, and because we don't explore the idea any further, we think that's the only path up the mountain. You know what I mean? So, like, is that what we're dealing with from like a gluttony standpoint?
What do
I
you
think it can manifest into that.
think?
I think, you know, I, I don't know. I'll say this as a blanket statement because, I have to see the world in a better light these days. But I think people don't intentionally start off thinking I'm going to, be gluttonous, right? So I think organizations don't necessarily start off in that mindset. I mean, I think there's a positive intent, why anybody would volunteer to put their company through a transformation, right? That's not something that's easy or, ill-willed, or I think it may have the right intention, but to me, when we focus the light on any one thing too much, and you mentioned agile ceremonies, right? When they become dogmatic, and then you get scrum masters or coaches that say, this is the way you have to do it, as opposed to try starting this way. We're going to do it this way for X amount of time, and then we're going to talk about it and learn what's working and what isn't. And then we can make small changes, right? That's where I think gluttony stops that from happening, because we're so locked in on completing the ceremony, we lose the actual value of why we're meeting, or why we're retrospecting, or what we're not prepared to do when we go into sprint planning, or what conversations we're not able to have because we're distracted by that dogma, right? Of the rigidity that we're being told we have to follow.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm going to kind of change the gluttony lens a little bit to look. I'm going to actually use myself as an example, right? So I overconsumed training classes. I have taken classes in anything and everything agile and agile adjacent that you possibly can. The pile of books over my shoulder, that's my unread pile, right? So that's another example of gluttony. So what have I done, right? And I will speak from experience, personal experience. I did so much reading into what could be, right? Into what could be, that I warped my own perception of, well, no, the organization has to do X, Y, and Z. And if we don't do these things, we're not going to be successful. And I know this is part of the normal learning curve that everybody goes through, but I personally overconsumed. I overconsumed too much of an ideal world. And at some point I lost my pragmatism. And it's taken probably the last year, 18 months of me to get that pragmatism back, to realize that there is no right or wrong. There just is. And we need to meet that is. So I would actually compare that to some organizations, right? Some organizations we're going to transform, right? And they run out and they hire a bunch of coaches and they hire a bunch of consultants and they say, we're going to do safer, we're going to do less, we're going to do whatever. And they go all in. And in trying to consume all that, right? And trying to consume the entire plate of all you can eat wings, right? I have inadvertently created all sorts of downstream problems for myself. And then at the end of the day, it's like, well, and maybe to finish the thought, maybe because the downstream effects, especially when it comes to food, right, are transient, that I have a stomachache for maybe half a day and then I don't. The lasting effect is going to come back with the heart disease, right? But because I don't necessarily see it, I'm going to do that again and again and again. So maybe on a low time preference, right? We're not really thinking about long term. It makes it easier to overconsume up front, and then we paint ourselves into a corner.
That also translates to the full-time professional trainers that are in our industry, and for the record, I have zero problem with anybody choosing that as a profession. There were many times that I would have loved that gig, to say, like, all I do is just, like, I work 2-3 days a week, and or do 2 classes a month. I know people that do a couple classes a month and they get by just fine, and or not just fine, like they do really well for themselves. But if all you're doing is communicating with people in that sterile environment, right? Like, could you become gluttonous as a trainer, just to say, all I'm going to talk to you about is the way the world could work in this sterile environment? Like that, it begs a question of, how are you balancing out your knowledge that you're then passing on to other people? And again, not having a problem with any of that, because most of the trainers that I know that do it, they also do some consulting on the side. They get a little bit of feedback. They spend time with company, or they have training contracts with organizations that they'll go be with and spend time with, and say, like, well, this is how your organization can utilize what we're training you on, in the real world. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about is when you get so focused on the letters after your name, or you get so focused on having the T after your name, you get so focused on that you forget, like, using this stuff is hard. It's really, really, really hard. To me, that's what gluttony is that when we said, this framework says X, I believe that. I am now going to carry the standard for that way of working, right? And if you disagree with me, go jump in the lake. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
just
So
that's where it is.
let me bake out the concept of gluttony a little further, Leff, and I want to know what you think of this definition. So here I am digging into the actual definition of gluttony, and it typically comes from biblical text. So Thomas Aquinas said the 5 ways to commit gluttony. Tell me if this doesn't sound like most or all the transformations you've been on. The 5 ways to commit gluttony: doing something that is too luxurious, exotic, or costly; something that is too daintily or elaborately prepared; too much; too eagerly; too soon, or at the inappropriate time. If that doesn't nail 90% of the transformations that we have been engaged in or asked to be help shepherd, help own, help steward, I don't know what does. So I guess my question is the primary argument that we are making that necessitates the transformation, have we talked ourselves into a rabbit hole that we can never find a way out of?
Ooh, that is a great question. And I think the way that you frame that question has got me thinking. Hopefully it has everyone listening thinking as well. For me, I think kind of what's coming up for me from what Chris said and what you just asked is, and I'm going to go a little coachy in the coachy direction, is how are we in relationship with that sin, right? How do we stay in a healthy relationship with any of them, but gluttony in particular, right? So since that's our focus, knowing that when we become gluttonous, are we able to pull back? Are we able to acknowledge that this is too much? Are we able to kind of also observe others and allow others to receive the feedback that you're being gluttonous, right? Probably nobody likes to hear that. That probably triggers you, gets you pissed off, gets you, pulled back. So how do we approach these kind of more friction-led conversations with acknowledging that you're in too much of an unhealthy relationship with gluttony right now? We need to unpack that. We need to kind of walk through it. Or organizations, we're doing too much of this, right? We can't be the agile hammer where everyone that works in the agile in this company is a nail, right? And that just doesn't feel good after a while. So I think that's the way I kind of would answer that question, which wasn't much of an answer, but it's kind of the way I'm thinking.
Very much an answer.
Yeah, very much. Are we getting too much into X? The X being, high centered on the rules, high centered on training, high centered on. I mean, it really comes down to, moderation is the happy, key to life and all that sort of stuff. Do we maybe instead of doing like agile maturity metrics, right? We should really create some sort of tool. Here we go. We'll all get rich. An agile balance metric of what are we indexing on? And it could be things like team structure. It could be things like flow. It could be things like skill sets. It could be things like adherence to value delivery, right? Like instead of looking at things like a radar, like a buckyball, right? I learned what that thing was from an old boss. Yeah. The ball that's kind of filled in. Maybe we should look at things more like a seesaw. And hey, you're to your point, Leff, like I know both you guys come from consulting, right? You've done polarity mapping. Are we way too over on the right and we're kind of killing the stuff that we need on the left? Maybe that's, I don't know, maybe this is also ties to human thing. Like maybe if we find a way to look at our transformations or even our coaching and where am I leaning too hard on? And then noticing that self-reflection allows you to lean more in the other direction, right? To your point, Leff, going less coachy, more pragmatic. Because there are times where you need to go both. And I think when we speak privately and when we take umbrage with some of the coaches that we work with and their approaches, I really think this may be the root cause of that. It's they lost the balance to lean too far in one way or the other. And that throws off your,
Yeah. So I want to
go ahead, Leff.
Just real quick. Something with what you just said, Jay. I had a conversation with someone about this yesterday, and I was sitting in a meeting and I had a couple coaches on the call, and then I had, stakeholders of that coaching on the call. and I was getting pinged on the side just saying, this is why I don't like coaches. This is why I'm frustrated, right? I just spent 45 minutes of valuable time talking about theory and talking about how and talk. It didn't solve the problem I went in asking to solve, right? And it was very interesting. And this keeps happening, right? This pattern. So I like how you said that, Jay, as far as maybe as coaches, we need to, we should always be looking for opportunities to balance. But it was very interesting to hear, because I'm not necessarily titled a coach in my current role. We're always coaching. But to hear how coaches now, to be on the other side as a consumer of coaching,
Yes.
it has blown my mind in the sense of, wow, I hear myself. I don't like it, right? Like it has changed a lot in my thinking and communication. But I think there's something there also. And then Chris, I'll let you, not let you, you can definitely jump in. But I also want to look at gluttony as how are we using it as a power, right? As a good, right? Is there opportunity to be gluttonous in a good way? Maybe.
Sure.
But
yeah, you
go ahead,
introduced that
Chris.
in the very first sin chat we had, and I really like that. So here's the funny thing about I love Leff that you're giving voice to something that we've felt for the last, I don't know, year and a half, 2 years, which is like being called a coach is almost a euphemism now. Like it's almost like, oh, don't call me a coach. Like I don't want to be lumped in with those folks. Like we get so focused on talking about work. I've probably told both of y'all this many times. I experienced this, especially when I was a consultant, like hearing internal folks at my client. We spend an hour and a half like we don't actually talk about the stuff that we need to get done and making progress on it. We talk about why it wasn't defined properly or why it should be this way instead of that way. And it'd be great helping out these teams if they would just do this. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't actually help them in any of this conversation. This meta conversation that we get bogged down in. We are agile coaching has become like the modern day philosophers of, yeah, but did you put any seeds in the ground and grow anything? Or did you just talk about why, sowing seeds is the root of all evil and therefore we must, look at a different way of, whatever Plato and Socrates and whatever that, they had their sins as well. But like, we are modern day professional philosophers who aren't actually getting things done, right?
Yes.
We have become addicted to not doing things. And so that we're gluttonous about again, Jay mentioned these theories and methodologies and like, well, agile is just a methodology. It's a state of mind. It's a state of
As soon as
being.
somebody
And
says
like,
it's a
yeah, but
mindset,
do you
more
know
than
that
practice.
doesn't actually get stuff done?
So shout out to Jeff Prey, who was on the show when we did the Flow Manifesto. He made the joke in a previous life when I worked with him that he used to say, the last thing you want is your coaches to be perceived as coffee swilling tourists, where they show up with a cup of coffee and they comment on the thing that's going on, and then they walk away and they're all happy because they commented and nothing changed, right? There definitely is. So maybe this is the problem. I'm gonna call it here. I think the inherent problem is the we have mentally broken up the idea between coaching and consulting, because both of you guys have done both. And I would think there are times where people ask for consulting and they want coaching, and they ask for coaching and they want consulting. And I think the difference is there's times people want some theory, but they also want you to tell them how to do it. And if we get too high centered on the navel gazing, right? Then we lose the plot. And I think it's back to the balance piece, right?
To a
And
degree.
Leff, your observation is really, that's hit me right in the feels, because now I'm thinking about some of the people that I have engagements with where do they walk away and go, Jesus Christ, this guy just talks about fucking theory. I need help.
But I think that opens up the what can I excuse me, why can't I communicate what I need? Or are we being too polite? And when I say polite, right, are we being too patient because we hired you, you're the expert to come in, or your role is deemed expert, I'm going to trust the process. And sometimes coaches, we get locked in on things, right? Where we see things and we get locked in and we're not able to read the room, right? Because we're trying to inspire something or trying to deliver something or trying to conversate around something that really isn't important in that person's eyes or that group's eyes because we haven't made that connection yet, where it's like, hey, I need, we haven't laid out that kind of, we need to do some discovery. We need to iterate a little bit. We need to swirl a little bit to flush out some of the ideas to put to action. And I think what you talked about just now, Jay, is something that I know Chris and I have had lots of conversations with other people about as well, is when do you wear the, not every coach can consult and not every consultant can coach. That hybrid kind of mindset, when you can wear both hats, to me is amazing to be able to flip that switch and say, all right, I've lost this room. I got to go into consulting mode and we got to start showing execution driven or have execution driven discussions, but from a coaching place, right? So I'm going to teach, we're going to try, you're going to apply, and then we're going to see what works. And then taking that repetitive, repeatable, creating rhythm, right? You become a conductor, then you're orchestrating this, you're conducting that orchestra, and then you produce good music. But no orchestra starts together and just plays a beautiful symphony, right? There's practice involved. There's someone, and the conductor, aka the coach, right? Or the just has that ear that can listen. You're a little bit sharp over here. You're a little bit flat, right? You're an eighth behind the rest of us. That is a really huge amount of work for your brain as one person to be able to orchestrate a room full of very dynamic people.
Yes, and
So
and to yes and that left, it takes a lot of practice to get good at. It takes a lot of practice. So I believe that the term I've come across and what you're looking for, I think Samuel Berger calls it a live player. You're looking for a live player, someone who's in there, who's in it, who can read the room and adapt and that is not easy. And I will be the first to admit I'm not that great at it. Not that great at it. I find myself slipping way more into consultant mode more than coaching mode. And it takes a ton of practice and a ton of skill and self-reflection to get there. But
yeah,
I think
we talk about the different stances that we're supposed to have, and we act like it's just like taking off one hat and putting on another that simply, when
it's not. It's wearing both simultaneously. It's the Sherlock Holmes hat. One's facing forward and one's facing backward, and which brim is going which way. That's a great point, Murman. That's a great point. The metaphor is flawed because you're not taking one off. You're really just switching it around.
I want to go. You mentioned different assessment maturity models earlier, Jay. I want to briefly touch on that just because from a gluttony standpoint, because I think we all have, having been forced to use several models only because different consultancies that I've been a part of said, I was part of a firm where the Agile fluency model was utilized, right? Where it's the spider charts, like you were mentioning, you rate, we were in the room rating them 1 to 5 on something or 0 to 5 on things. There's agility health radar, which some people are very religious about and very supportive of, much more comprehensive again. But then now the new thing is the growth wheel that I am again, love all the ideas that Bob and his compatriots have put in to not only coming up with something that's fair from an assessment perspective, but also broad enough to where we can see our full skill set that we need to be growing in. But the challenge in all of those things is there will be one that you gravitate to more than another. And then you think everybody needs to use this model to assess themselves. And we talk about data as if the data is like actual scientific. The thumbs up keeps coming up for me. The idea that, well, the data is going to be scientific and it's going to be actionable and it's going to be something we can do. We talk about AI and ML and how it's changing everything, like without realizing that most of the data that we gather on teams is funny math in it, like and that's barely calling it funny math. That's a compliment to call it funny math. Like now we're going to let machines tell us where the problems are based on these fake numbers that we come up with. Like who are we kidding ourselves with thinking these models are going to fix people when all it is just something else to add to the conversation. I don't care which model you use. It will be misused by most people because they don't understand how to apply the numbers and the conversations you have around those numbers. So don't get so gluttonous about data that you're like, well, I'm a database coach, or I'm a database consultant, or I'm a database team lead and stuff. Which data? And who's watching over this data to make sure you're training the model with the right information? I think we're setting ourselves up for failure by doing that.
I think
So-
and I'm just gonna spit this out real quick.
Yeah,
I think the thing you're touching on is the importance of self-awareness, right? So to be self-aware, to know that, hey, I am centering on X, right? Not saying it's good, not saying it's bad, but saying that, hey, I'm being very data intensive right now. Just acknowledging that fact, you may lead you to either flip it or change or take a different path when that burns in. Go on, Leff.
No, I agree. And I think what kind of pops in my head when what you just were talking about, Chris, is if we go back to assessments, right? All this data, all this information, we are inundated with information on a daily basis. Too much, right? Overstimulated. So does time become gluttonous? Because if you think about it, that data is just information for us to do something with. But if we can't focus in on certain things about that data, devise a plan, because we're pushing ourselves against this arbitrary timeline, this fictitious kind of view of things to get something done, I guess. I don't know. I'm never really clear on, other than, well, that's regulatory and compliance. Well, does someone go to jail if we don't do that? Well, no. Well, what bad happens if we don't complete this work? We get a fine. How much is the fine? X amount of dollars. Well, it's going to cost us $6 million to do this, kind of effort. Is it? So this demand of time and these assessments, right? These maturity assessments that we have all this information, but does anyone truly trust your organization to be honest in an assessment? I mean, you might be somewhat honest. You might, put some things in there. But I say this all the time with the employee satisfaction stuff, right? Who writes a good Amazon review? Are you more inclined to write a good review versus you're going to write a negative one because you're pissed? So I think that's also something that I'm not sure these assessments balance for, right? The emotion of what's drawing me to write the words on the page, and the lack of transparency, because I'm mad at my company because I thought I was a good performer and you just saw me as a meets or needs improvement, right? Because I'm not able to, I can only give out X amount of meets and X. Yeah. So I think the data is not being looked at in a way that helps us understand how to move in a direction, right? That data just creates a little kid's soccer game. There's just a bunch of little kids running around kicking the ball. There's no rhyme or reason, right? Their goal is to kick the ball. That's it.
Very, very, very true. So let's, with the time we've got left, let's talk about the positive aspects of gluttony, right? So how could we lean into the natural gluttonous nature of ourselves? And I'll kick it off with, as for the practitioners out there, the best use of your gluttony is the more gluttonous you act very quickly will help you through your own change curve. So we're all familiar with the Satir change curve, right? We go through this all the time. There's been plenty of LinkedIn, navel gazing, intellectual yet idiots who have talked about how, you find this new thing, you think it's the greatest thing in the world, then you get far enough into it and you think it's, oh my God, this is terrible. And then you reach that point where, okay, it's just another piece. Each one of us goes through that journey ourselves. It's the way our human OS is made up of. So if you're finding yourself, I want to learn all things Agile, Scrum, Kanban, whatever, there's a particular niche you want to get into, my advice would be to dive in both feet as hard and fast as you can, because real quickly the only way you can accelerate the change curve is by hastening through it. And my personal journey was I reached a point where I'm like, well, okay, it just is. I don't need to dive into this any further because I get it. I get enough. I know that there's reference out there if I need it, but I want to start using it and move on to something else. So that's for a selfish use of gluttony is I'm not saying lean into it when it comes to like burgers and chips and stuff, because that's not a good line. But and when you're intellectually gluttonous, if you've got a moment, go for it. But then you end up like me with the pile of books back there. So keep it within reason.
What about you, Leff? Like, where do you feel like gluttony could be a benefit?
So I had this conversation the other day with someone that I work with, right? Anyway, coaching moment, and they were telling me that they're working too much, and their family was impacted by how much they're working, and they're not happy with them. And I said, well, what are you doing about it? And they were like, well, I need to do it. And I said, well, whoever told you you needed to work all these hours? Nobody. So why are you doing it, right? Do you become glutton? Like that to me is a signal, right? There's gluttony because you're attaching yourself to, not that it's a pleasurable activity. So I want to, balance. I know that in the purest definition of gluttony, it doesn't necessarily map, but in the context we're using it. So I've been experimenting with trying to give people tools when they are, looking at gluttony in that way. So I'm actually going to use this now in this frame with others. So to me, the positive side of it is being able to establish boundaries, right? So are we being gluttonous in our working habits? So I gave them homework and I said, for the next couple weeks, I said, for the next 4 weeks, you need to take 2 nights. You need to shut your computer off at 6 p.m. and not log back in. And I want you to be accountable for that. That's your homework for the next couple weeks. And I want you to tell your family that that's what you're going to do because you heard them. Right. So having that signal there to be able to say, okay, I'm being too gluttonous, or this is gluttony, right? I'm leaning too far in one direction and I'm doing too much of one thing. I'm too narrow focused. I think it's important. So I think that to me is how I'm going to utilize gluttony as a positive by saying, all right, I'm going to realize when I'm becoming gluttonous, or I'm going to hear when someone tells me I'm being that way. And believe me, I'm the most gluttonous individual on the planet with my shoe habit, right? So
Well,
I believe me, I am gluttonous. So I overindulge in lots of things in life because it makes me feel good. So I think that's the other thing is, when is feel good become a problem? And that's also the balance, right? When we talked, I love the polarity scale in that, right? Are we being too positive on one side or too negative on the other? And then I did this exercise with another individual that I'm mentoring, and I said, I want you to write down on the polarity map, the positives and the negatives, right? And then we're going to see how it balances out. So I think that's a really good tool, Jay, something simple that everyone can use. It's the investment that you want to make in actually doing it. I think that's the other piece is do you have the internal, intestinal fortitude to want to continue to do something like this, because it does take time, and time feels like we don't have a lot of it, yet we do if we make it. That was like a really scenic route. Sorry.
No. But your reference to the polarity map. So, Leff, let's think about it. Whenever any one of us, I guarantee you, each one of us on this call has done this at least 2 or 3 times. When you change jobs, the first thing you create is that polarity map, right? You get the offer. It's the pros and cons. What are the pros of leaving? What are the pros of staying? What are the cons of leaving? What are the cons of staying? If we're willing to invest that time when it comes to changing jobs, right, to do that polarity map, we should be willing to invest that time of a decision in a decision that is just as important as changing jobs, which is, what am I spending my time on? What am I really digging into? What's important to me, right? That self-assessment and the self-image thing. Why do we, I guess it's a question to us in our human OS is kind of wonky. Why do we only do that type of exercise when it comes to jobs where there's money on the line? Why wouldn't we do, to your point, your example is spot on with our own careers.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's
crazy.
This idea of not living in a vacuum keeps coming out of all of our words that we're saying. If there's anything to be gluttonous about, it's I need to be gluttonous about not like not involving anybody else in my journey. I tell people this all the time. The greatest investment in me as a person. We talked about some about me personally. We talked about some about me personally or professionally when I was going through tough times, and both is like, I got myself a coach, right? I paid money out of my pocket, good money, for a coach. I should be doing it right now. I am not, and in full transparency, I should probably invest in some more of that right now, just because time's gone on. It's been a few years since I last had some coaching. But you want to talk about like diving into anything? It's I am diving into not making all the decisions about myself in a vacuum, right? I am being open and transparent with, this is where I'm at. I feel like this sucks today. I feel like this is good today. Oh, the thing that I think sucks actually isn't bad. Personal coach, like, oh, that's cool. Well, what do you base that off of? Oh, your experience and all the other people that you've coached before. That you've seen this before, and it's not always a terrible thing. Maybe I'm not either. We learned that, number one, we're not as bad off as we think. Number two, we have some actionable things that I can do over the course of, I always say, when I tell people, in coaching scenarios at work, what the next time we talk, you should be able to make progress in something. And if you can't make any progress, then we need to either pick something else to do. We need to break it down into smaller enough chunk that you can actually make progress in something. So if you can't make you should be able to say, I'm working on this, and the next time we meet, I'm going to have progress on it. Like it's that simple. And you can't do that alone. Like, you need people in your life that will speak truth to you. So if there's anything to overconsume on, it's, I'm going to overconsume on people speaking life into me. That's why I'm friends with y'all. That's why I'm friends with the rest of the board and the community that I have, is that you all speak honestly to me.
It's a good point. Seek out that, but again, there is a chance that could tip over to the negative. But seek out people who are going to, people who are going to tell you the honest truth about it. And I think if you want to tie it to pop culture, we all know people who have gotten rich and famous, who you can tell they're surrounded by people who don't ever tell them they have a bad idea, and they make consistently bad life decisions. And
they own the Dallas Cowboys.
We could go there. I was thinking more of Lindsay Lohan in her early days, hanging out in Paris Hilton, where it got her. But yeah, I mean, when you surround yourself only by people who are going to tell you yes, and only tell you this is a good idea. Now, I'm not saying you surround by people who always want to try and knock you down a peg, but I mean, it comes down to, we can loop this back with trust, right? You need to be surrounded by people you trust to. When I'm being insensitive, when I'm being over aggressive, when I'm doing this or that, and a lot of times your partner will do it, and it creates relationship problems because that's not the thing we're expecting from a partner typically. And when, my wife tells me I'm being completely unrealistic, she's 99.99% of the time she's right. I don't want to hear it at that point because I'm being unrealistic. But, we need to seek out more of that, here we go. I'm going to quote Ben. It's all about finding the right balance, and we need to seek that out. And constant questioning of yourself without over questioning is not necessarily a bad thing.
So I want to challenge the audience that listens to us in that same vein, and something the two of you touched on, and what came up for me when you were talking about it is, do we absorb or give out too much negativity, or do we absorb or give out too much positivity, right? So to me, if you're constantly, super positive, you can trigger the people that are more pessimistic, more reserved. And if you're too negative, you can steal that from the people that want to be positive and focused, right? It's a drain. You become a vampire. So how do you start mapping out when you need to kind of be more positive versus more negative? And maybe that's the gluttony of the mindset can then trigger that kind of thinking. So I want people to kind of go back and write down some positive interactions versus some negative interactions, and think of things, since a lot of us are in finance, debits and credits, right? Or do we have a good, healthy account balance in our account? Are we living a paycheck by paycheck? Or are we in the red, right? Because we're surrounding ourselves with people that are constantly taking, or we're just giving, right? Without ever having anyone put credits back into our account. And I'm not saying that relationships need to be highly transactional, but let's face it, they are. to some degree. So let's use that transactional quality to keep a healthy balance in the bank account to ensure that people still feel valued, right? Or their value is being heard or felt or experienced, or they're providing value for someone else, but not too much, because you don't want to be the rock all the time, right? Because you will eventually, the surf will erode that rock away.
Yeah, gluttony
That's an
can be
awesome
a
point.
positive if it's in short sprints, right? Like spending, just saying, hey, for the next month, I'm going hard. I'm going hardcore into. I've got this giant stack of books, Hrcsko, that I've been wanting to read. I've got a list of books too. I'm not making fun of you. Like, the next month, I am gonna consume as much of that as I can, but I'm only doing it this month, right? Like, I dry January. It's become a big thing and stuff. Like a big thing to kind of like clean your body out after the holidays and stuff. Like, I don't think I think doing that for an entire year, that may not be your cup of tea. Like, that may be going too hard into it, but you can spend a month and just kind of, hey, I'm gonna exercise this month. I'm gonna clean up what I'm doing. I just pick something for a little bit, right? Like, short-term gluttony is, in a sense, is not what gluttony is defined as, but that's how to turn gluttony into a positive, is just saying, I'm gonna spend a little bit of time focusing on this one thing that I've been, to Leff's credit, like, I've been in the red on in my life for a little bit, like, hey, I'm just giving really hardcore to my family going through the holidays. Like, hey, I'm gonna spend January, like, I'm gonna kill it in the gym, or I'm
Yeah.
gonna really journal more, or whatnot. And then, it'll be time for spring break before you know, and then it's time to invest in the family again. And so going back and forth between different areas of your life to truly invest in, like, that's how we find balance.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, Jay, final thoughts.
My final thoughts is it's actually kind of built bootstrapping on Leff's challenge to the audience. I want to know what they think about this series so far.
Yeah.
I'd ask that you hop on, anybody listening, watching, hop on a Discord and see what, tell us what you think. Again, we're just three guys who have some opinions and we're just sharing them. And truth be told, we don't want it to be the three of us every time. We're, it's the way schedules worked out. But
Andy helped out last time.
I think that gluttony isn't necessarily the bad thing if you're aware. If I guess in closing, gluttony isn't necessarily a bad thing if you're aware that you're being gluttonous and you have the fortitude to turn it off and to taper. I think naturally, Leff and I think we're a lot more alike than we realize. Considering we both done mortgages and all that sort of stuff. I think there is some of us naturally go down that rabbit hole where things we get obsessed with. With him, it's shoes. With me, it's books. Right, but being consciously aware of that is half of it, because then okay, I got to pull it back a bit. So yeah, I would challenge the audience to, and the balance map. Create your own balance map. And if you come up with a good one, please share it with us in Discord. Send it to us via email. I'd love to see what you come up with. Maybe this is the next thing. Maybe some of you get rich off of coaching balance, personal assessment. But I think I think there's something there. I just don't necessarily have the brain power to work through it. But if you can come up with it, please share it, because I think that'd be a great tool for all of us to use.
Yeah. Leff, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I think this was so to echo what Jay just said, and I really want to know what people think about this concept, and I want to kind of put that call to action out there for people to experiment with. But I also want to know when we say be in relationship with these sins, right, or these emotions, is how do you react to that? Because I know when I started my coaching journey, all these certifications, I was like, relationship, what are you talking about, right? Like that's ridiculous. I can't go into a client and talk this way. So I think also being in relationship with being coached. So I think I want to challenge our listeners to really kind of think through that and pop in the Discord and let us know your thoughts, right? And this isn't a shameless plug. We don't charged for people to get. We really want to engage with practitioners, curiosity, travelers, explorers, whatever you want to label yourself as, to really understand things, right? We have a strong point of view about a lot of things based on our experience, but we're not looking to just use that, right? We want to crowdsource a ton of information because maybe we're not in the right space, right? Maybe we're not thinking the right thing. Maybe we're stuck in a time that no longer exists. I don't know. So please, that's the call to action. I really want to hear more about this because this podcast series I'm super passionate about. I think it's been really a fun journey for me. So I appreciate the voices on the call every time. So this is, and Jay and Chris, you always have such a great way of kind of filtering through a lot of chaos in my head. So I appreciate the two of you allowing me to kind of go out there, but keeping me on that tether.
Yeah, a tether is all we're trying to be. I mean, and really it's just a tether to what our reality is, right? All we can be connected is who we are and wherever we are. 5 years ago, I would have been scared to death to talk about the sins of our work. And I'm not afraid of it anymore. I'm actually like excited to say like the coolest thing about this series is how can these sins be used for good? And that's not something you hear in any religious service in any whatsoever. So we're not, because we're not a religion, right? All we're doing is just saying like these are human things that we struggle with, and we're trying to find a way to use them for just a little bit of good. So on behalf of Jay and Leff, my name is Chris Murman. We got more sins coming. This is our third 3 down, 4 more to go. Please join us on Discord. Free coaching there, and people to hang out with to make fun of us about. So this is Agile Uprising signing off.